has been designed in such a way that you can't actually run anything through the building, and it's on site, and everyone's starting to realise, it's a bit of a nightmare when you get to that stage. So
So
you,
what's the implication of that? Sorry, Paul.
the thing, we're still seeing it. It's like when people design steel frame buildings, I'm sure Ian will appreciate this as well, is they keep putting all the steels again across all the compartment lines, running linear fashion with the walls, and suddenly when everyone realises actually you can't go for the beam and to go for the wall, you're actually 300 below the bottom of the beam anywhere to get through it. It's too late, especially when they're constructed. You can't correct it. You end up with doors that are too high, things coming through the wall that have to be too low. It just becomes an absolute nightmare to correct. You have to like physically move walls, and everyone gets upset because NIA. Still seeing it.
So how does that fit with the fire? Is that a part of what we were just talking about there with the fire engineers?
Yeah, because the thing is, if you look at a structural engineer, they'll design a structure, won't they? Right? Design a structure. They go, that's it, got all the torsion, drift, the shear loads are all locked in, brilliant, done. But we're not doing the passive compartmentation of the beams because we're not experts. Then it goes through another bit of rigmarole, and people would draw pipes and ducts and things and that, and they'll show them all going through the wrong place because actually you can't take them for the beams. And by the time someone comes on and goes, actually, hold on a minute here, when you're on site and you go, you can't put it through there because the penetration tool companies are getting better. You go, what do we do? You go, you got to remove the beams and it's built, so you can't do that. You got to move all the walls. We can't because the NIA. And you go, because no one wants to give, do they? We see it like with riser safe systems as well. They're great systems, these riser safe systems. The problem is that there's an appropriate place to put them and an unappropriate place to put them. And if you got, excuse me, if you've got loads of stuff running up a riser, and you look at where it's come with the new fire code as well, the HST 168, you're in the situation, or HSC 168, should I say, you're in the situation as if you put the stuff in, it's made of steel, and it's got to be a compartment floor, and you've not picked up the fact it should have been a compartment floor, you're knackered. It wants to be torn out. Do you know what I mean? So you're still seeing these things going on, but fire engineers won't pick it up because they're not experts on products, are they? That's the kind of issue, So it will get
So
better.
who would pick it up if they're not the experts on products?
Well, not normally. About try not to be too wrong about this, but
Yeah.
you can get a situation where the architect doesn't see it, the building service engineer doesn't see it, fire engineer doesn't see it, the principal contractors don't see it, and it's not until you come down to supply chain engagement they don't always see it because they're only supplying pipes, and you've got a riser safe system installed, and someone goes, well, how do we seal that? And you go, well, you can't because what ends up happening is if you've got big open like risers like this, and they go, well, it's 3 different spaces, we'll put some steel beams in between so we can put the riser safe in. Then you haven't got the substrate on all 4 sides to actually put a concrete floor back in. You can get to that really late in the day when someone goes, hold on, how does that work? That time, then it's all deconstruction, not construction, because you're pickled. And from Ian's point of view, what happens then is the person that's put the drywall on it gets the blame, which is not right. Well, 1 second, I've just got to take this call. Sorry. What's the fire?
So that's possibly right. It's because people aren't looking at things in a holistic way, isn't it?
Yeah, no, fair point. They're siloed.
There's lots of these things, isn't there? I mean, we were looking at, I was talking to Joe the other day about one where you've got overweight doors, or not even overweight doors that weigh more than 60 kilograms that need extra support in the frames. And then if that's not done properly and appropriate at the right time, then the wall configuration can't be built around the door. And there's also a little bit of timber in there that we're not sure whose test evidence it covers. Or whose test evidence covers that bit of timber, because the door manufacturer needs a bit of timber for you to fix to. The drywall manufacturer won't cover that bit of timber in their construction. So you've kind of ended up with these situations where you've got this extra bit. It's a bit like, remember that little bit of wood we used to talk about on the staircases, Martin? Fixing the timber staircase to the steel. So it's a little bit of an issue. Again, it's who's responsible for that extra little bit of wood.
Yeah.
Fire curtains bring to mind, Ian, with that.
Yeah.
Because you end up with C16 timber, didn't you, inside the wall to fix the anchors into the drywall system. You've got a drywall system with a C16 timber and anchor in it. Then one goes, well, who warrants that? Which should be the test of the curtain, but all gets a bit difficult, doesn't it, to determine who takes liability for it. Or are we just overthinking it? Not too sure.
I think we got too good at sorting things out on site, generally speaking, Paul, and the front end got lazy because sort it out on site was the way forward.
What's the go-to solution?
Yeah, mean, and then when you get it wrong, you get criticised. Yeah.
We've got we've got a whole series of workshops that Richard's organised over this next 2 or 3 weeks, and the purpose of those is to basically revisit the guidance that was produced sort of 18 months ago, and just see if it's still fit for purpose, and to be frank, get a lot more subject matter experts engaged in that process. And he's been very successful in getting a lot of people to sign up to it.
Yeah.
So if there are things that we want to sort of float past them as subject matter experts in these different areas, then that's an opportunity. I don't know if that's.
No, it's good. I mean, I've accepted a lot of them. I think on the fire damper one, because I've got to mention fire dampers mine. I think Paul White had asked him to move the date of it because he's the one you really want in there, because he's rewriting all the guidance, but he couldn't do the date that was pertained. I think
we've moved it.
Brilliant, perfect.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. The one on the 22nd on smoke control dampers, I can't do it unfortunately because I'm not around. But as long as Paul's there, I don't think it matters too much because he again is the leading guru on that subject.
But the good news is that we seem to have a lot of people, new people engaged. I mean, like well over 100.
It's good.
Have joined.
More the merrier.
Yeah.
You need diverse views on all of this, George, as well, because there's things that you don't see it until someone says, "I've had this problem." You go, "Oh, I've never seen that before." It's good.
It's encouraging as well, George, that more and more people are coming to the party, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think. I mean, I'm also talking with some people who are doing risk assessments and moving into principal designer roles, which I think is also encouraging as well. They're CDM, one particular company called Safersphere. They're CDM coordinators or health and safety specialists, and they are very much gearing up now to offer that principal designer role. And I think that's going to be, my impression is that's going to be a really important function.
It is probably more so than the CDM regs require a principal designer to be. All the real roles and responsibilities of a principal designer under CDM are one thing, but the principal designer called it the same thing, but different set of roles and responsibilities for the Building Safety Act. Interesting.
What's the difference between a principal designer and a principal contractor?
Different role, different responsibilities, different stages.
And when you say different stages, so does the principal designer still have a role during construction?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that'd be the case. Right to handover, I guess.
And a bit of beyond as well, George.
Yeah. And what about principal contractor? What's different about the role?
In between CDM and building safety?
Yeah, as far as building safety is concerned. Do you know what the role of the principal contractor is in terms of building safety?
No, I think it's just a bolt-on in terms of the principal contractor. Would just be a bolt-on in terms of responsibilities to make sure that the engagement's been done with the fire authorities and that the handover information to the occupier is carried out, and that I think there's a legal requirement now to do the Section 38 of the Fire Safety Act handover of documentation as well. So it's just more robust. Would be a summary.
So the principal contractor, the handover of documentation would rest with them.
Preparation, delivery, and handover, isn't it? That's the 3 stages, isn't it? They've got responsible for the preparation of a workable program, ensuring that that's delivered, incorporating change management and information management, and that handover, that's then the baton's passed to the, and that's a legal responsibility as it is with CDM.
Yeah. So they would be responsible for making sure that the information that is being handed over is right.
Is as built, yes.
Okay. And is that a person within?
Got me there.
Would it be a named person on a project?
It will be it's an accountable person, isn't it? So
Yeah.
yes. So it's defined duty holders.
It's an AP in it or something. It's called in it AP.
I missed that. Sorry.
Oh, they got they had it on the slides, didn't they, on the day at the regulator, didn't they? It was the basics an accountable person. It's an AP essentially. They got two names for it.
Yeah.
It's an AP essentially.
So that would be a principal contractor and a named person, Paul. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, let's look at the slides quickly. Hold on, mate.
I think it's
bring it back up.
persons, isn't it? But it's accountable. But it is ultimately whoever's the ultimate responsibility will rest with the CEO of the principal contractor, isn't it? They're ultimately responsible for delivery within the business. But there will be other duty holders to find, and then beyond that, you get all of the different duty holders in the construction and design element. And you can be a main contractor and principal designer, who owns designer as well. You can hold multiple hats. So it's
Okay, good. Yeah, so what I'm trying to do at the moment is see how we can coordinate the work that's done by whoever's producing that safety plan, as it were, and the safety case report, and the ongoing safety management system. Because what's become clear, and we did this at the Digital Construction Week, everybody's at the moment focusing on registering their building and producing a safety case report. But what I think that many don't realise is that safety case report's a snapshot in time. And therefore, you have to have something in place that is an ongoing safety management system. So the landlord has to do that. And I guess the I don't know where the duties hold with the main contractor on that, but because obviously things are going to change, aren't they, during after handover?
Yeah, the building owner or the landlord will have to have their own safety management system, which is an ongoing management system, isn't it?
Of course, yeah, that's clear. I agree, but it is the case that at the moment it's not clear as to how they're actually going to do that.
Yeah, no. Principal accountable person. Then you've got accountable persons.
Yeah, the principal accountable person. That is that on the client side. I think on the client side, that has been explained to me as being if you'd have an accountable person that is probably responsible for one building, and then if you might then have a principal accountable person where there's more than one accountable person.
Yeah. I think I sent these out before. This is from the. I think I've got all this slide deck now in the original PDFs as well. It kind of explains it in here what was supposed to be going on. So.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, so this is the one from the regulator day that kind of explained it. I think I've sent this to you, George, anyway, so it's out there. So principal accountant, you got PAPs and you got APs that sit underneath it.
Yeah, you may have sent it to me. I must admit, I've not.
No,
I've not opened that up.
it's all so much going on, isn't it? It's all a bit confusing.
So the PAP would be an organisation as such, Paul. I would take
it. That's what it is. So you might I'm not. It's like I had a conversation recently. I won't name the person it was, but my biggest fear is that if you look at the principal design and you go, "No, I'm going to give them all of these duties," and you go, "No disrespect, I don't mean in any shape, fashion, which is wrong," is that they don't have the knowledge of all these different systems, right?
Yes.
So they're not going to spot it, right? And so the fire engineers don't understand the products, they're not going to spot it. Building control again don't understand, they're not going to spot it. So there's still this kind of risk that all these people that are now accountable, but actually, who's actually dealing with the risk?
Yeah.
That's the bit that frightens me. Because you see the effects on big projects where you get to the end and you go, there's 7 tiers of hierarchy that has not spotted it, and now it's there. Do you know what I mean? Then you've got to deal with it. It's going to be a hard gig to get it right. Hold on, my neighbour's dog's just done an entrance into the house, so it must be open. Oh, my camera's off.
There's never a dull moment, is there?
No, never a dull moment. As I say, look.
Oh wow! Dog.
It's my neighbour's dog. I better take him back. Back in a minute. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So we had a good session at DCW that I can give you some feedback on, and then go from there if that would be useful.
Yeah, you sent something over the weekend that you wanted to talk through today.
Well,
part of it.
That was something slightly that came after DCW, and again I can talk about that because Paul was involved in it. Basically, what obviously we're trying to do is to encourage more knowledge sharing, and the best way of doing that is to give people problems and then come up with the collective solution to those problems. And what happened was that Jarek, who I don't know if you know Jarek, but he's an electrical specialist, very switched on character, Jarek Whittick, and he asked the group that attended the Digital Construction Week about a particular problem with the stairwell. And he was trying to figure out how to address this. Now, he's a very knowledgeable guy. He'd done a lot of research, but he was not clear as to how to move forward with it. So he sent me some information. He asked me if we could do something, and he put up there what research he'd done and what was the missing gap, as it were. So Paul responded to him. I'm just saying that thing that you did a couple of weeks ago, Paul, where you responded to
7671, yeah,
Jarek, and then Roy Buckingham, who's from Abloy, came back on and said, he thought it was very useful that this sort of thing was being posed. So one of the things that I'm just trying to get my head around, how best can we facilitate that type of dialogue where there's actually a problem? I mean, we set up on BIM for Housing the black box site, and that the whole intention of that was to encourage this type of debate. But I think the problem with any I had this same problem with Zero. I don't know if you know, but I helped set up Zero, which is the Zero Construct initiative. And we were doing all of that through WhatsApp. And people became a bit frustrated that WhatsApp's a fairly basic technology, and there's better collaboration platforms. So we moved everything over to something called Disperse, which is far cleverer, and you can set up different groups and all the rest of it. And nobody used it. Yeah. Because WhatsApp's quick and simple. You can put a question up there. It's not organized. People are answering questions, and you can set up particular groups, which they've done very well in Zero, for particular topics. But again, it's just a stream of comments and things.
Yeah.
And to some extent, I think we have to make it easy for people to engage.
Yeah.
And maybe a way of doing that is just to have this type of thing where, encourage people to put up there a particular topic, which we can then circulate. And then if somebody's got some views on it, they can share it, and we can then potentially take that information and put it into the Black Box site. But I just wanted to ask what your thoughts were on that.
I mean, that one for the Black Box was fine, George, because I think that kind of stuff's good, because the conflict in that particular one is that you've got a standard that says you can have sanitary combination off a firefighting shaft, but then they're saying you shouldn't have services that go through it that don't feed anything but the shaft, but the sanitary accommodation's off the shaft. It's just like, how does that work? So, you having it in there where you can go, actually, this is all the facts around it, is useful to other people to make their determination. Do you know what I mean? Actually, what they want to do to design around it. It's only a good thing, and Black Box is good. I think the hard thing is, George, getting to a platform where everyone's consistently feeding in and out of it is physically really hard, because businesses have so many different media now for transmission of information. They've got Teams, they've got email, they've got WhatsApps, they've got other things, different platforms for recording health and safety, different things for records that are digital. It's just getting, it's too many.
I entirely agree. And taking, for example, that email exchange that you did and turning that into something that would be useful would be quite a bit of work for somebody that really would need to understand what the topic was as well.
What's the role of Cross in this now?
Yeah, good question.
Say that again. What's the role of
Cross
group?
Yeah, well, they're supposed to be dealing with our mandatory duty to report, aren't they? And there's still no real tight definition of what a near miss is. Is a near miss something that nearly happened at design phase? Is a near miss how this sort of mandatory reporting stuff is? But I had an interesting one the other day where a company I know's worked on a number of buildings which are all identical across the country, and there was a fire in one of them, not on one of the ones they worked on, and they'd like access to the information about the cause and movement of that fire, but they're not entitled to it. And you think, well, is that not something that Cross should be exposing? So what happens if there's a fire in a building? What actually happens to the information about that fire, and how much of that's made available to the supply chain, in what kind of time frame, by whom and when, is quite a big open question for me still. But all of these things about, how do you ensure that there's a record of a problem that's made available to people, and that's kind of what Cross are there to do. But I think everyone's really underestimated what big a role that is.
Yeah.
It
does need proper curating, doesn't it? That all of that information, it needs. That's not something that's solvable from software perspective. It needs people behind it, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely.
And I'm not being funny as well, but I mean, when you look at, I don't know what fire you pertain to talk about, but generally you find that all the fires that are occurring I'm not trying to generalize this, but all the ones that are total building loss, you know, and to some degree, even Grenfell falls into this. It's all to do with cavities, isn't it? And whether it's an external cavity or an internal cavity, then it's the construction material that's been used and the lack of sealing around those cavities. Take the one on Auckland and Shetland that the FPA does lectures on around about the MMC agenda out there, where the 2 buildings burnt down because the fire got in the cavity. Do you know what I mean? It's all interesting when you look at it and you sort of say, well, buildings that are made generally of steel and concrete, provided it's not an external cavity, it's internal generally, I don't think you read about big fires in that material because they don't seem to really occur. Does that make sense? If I'm generalising that or not, but that's how my head kind of sees the ones that I've seen recently. Or they're old buildings, aren't they, for historic purposes, and basically you're never going to you're always going to get a total loss if they go up in flames. The big thing is get everyone out alive in the first instance.
Yeah.
It's hard because, you know, when it comes down to reporting, you know, fires in buildings, there's obviously the legal consequence that goes on as well. No one wants to declare what's happened, do they?
That's why Cross though, isn't it? Because Cross is supposed to be effectively the black box, isn't it? That's the way I sort of read it at the start of it. Cross was effectively supposed to be the industry-wide black box where people can raise their concerns, deposit them, so that they're responsibly dealt with.
I know somebody that is one of the Cross advisors, Paul Bray. He's from Plymouth, so he's quite active in Benford Housing, but he's also one of the consultants that works. You know, I think they're all volunteers.
I think they are. I think there's a couple of people from the ASFP have gone onto it as well, from memory. I'm not sure if they're in it yet or they were applying to. But they've you know, Cross started off as safer structures, didn't it? But it's bridged across many different subjects now, and you know, not trying to sound like I'm generalising. I'm trying to not say the wrong thing. So when you look at all of these things that go wrong, from what I'm seeing recently again, is that it's a culmination of many different system failures to get to the overall consequence that you get to, whether there's a fire or not. You go and see the building, you can kind of see how they've, you know, followed each other to that natural conclusion where the materials or the whole compartmentation system of the building's wrong. Do you know what I mean? So it's got to be hard for Cross to pick all of that up. That's probably why I think they need to probably, if they're not, I think they are asking for more experts at the moment, aren't they? Pollen count's big today because my throat's on fire.
The mandatory occurring though, Ian, that you mentioned, that just hasn't landed yet, has it? They're out for consultation almost in terms of what are we going to do. I mean, they've mentioned Cross, they've mentioned Riddle, but there's no way forward been agreed yet, is there, in terms of who do we go to?
As I read it all, it was sort of that we were going to use the Cross framework to manage it, but that's about as far as I've seen. And there's not, I say, when I don't know enough about Cross and how it works now, but what say for example, if one of our members was working on a project and one of the issues the issue Paul identified earlier was in the pack, right? Then you're moving towards a clear and present risk to safety in that building, and you've quoted for it. You've allowed for it in your quote. You know somebody else probably hasn't as won the job.
Yeah.
If you've got a duty to report that,
I don't know.
Well, I think the bottom line is really, you know, do you know, not to be facetious, but you can sometimes point out the blimmin' obvious, Ian, and sometimes the people, the receptors, don't understand what it is. Do you know what I mean? You see things all the time, which, you know, we've had it on jobs when I've gone to clients, look, your structural frame's wrong. You can't compartment everything through the walls. And you go back 8 months later and someone else is building it, and the client's in big dramas because that contractor's now got the issue because they can't put anything through the frame. And you go, well, it's just someone's now contractually liable to make it work. It's horrific, really. And but no one can see it. Do you know what I mean? The amount of times you get told, we'll just go and test it. Well, you can't test everything. And actually, there's no procedure to do it. You can't even test it ad hocly because it's just mixing standards that aren't compatible.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard. It is hard, Ian.
The thing is, it's almost on the higher risk buildings. It's fine, isn't it? Which is where your mandatory duty to report is. It's because you sort of hope that the process will pick it up anyway. So if it's not picked up at procurement stage, it should be picked up by the building safety regulator. I think it's just a wider application of the rules. And if there is a fire in a building that's not high risk and you didn't report or you didn't do anything, what's your liability? There's so much inferred in the Building Safety Act. There's so much inferred in the responsibilities around it. Yeah, one thing they said at that safety regulators conference is the CDM requirements are the same for all, didn't they? So that bit's not different for any part of the Building Safety Act. That all buildings are now required to conform to the requirements of the CDM requirements as laid out in the Building Safety Act and subsequent documentation. So it's a challenging one, isn't it?
No, it is. It's really, I just think that until the knowledge gets better with it, I think those kind of shenanigans are going to go on where you can say to a client, look, your building shape and form doesn't really work, but until it kind of manifests itself into that problem, they don't go, now I can see what you mean. And the thing is, I said this recently internally as well. You're not to quote too much, but we have a good habit of going, well, that project was a problem because of this. We don't go, that one was really good because of this. Do you know what I mean? Because it doesn't manifest itself, you can't say, why did it go so well? Because it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, because you just done it. You haven't captured it.
You've done it. Yeah, you haven't captured it. It's really, really hard. You got to capture the good. I suppose I used to do reports years ago called "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly." Obviously, a bit of Eli Wallach, Clint Eastwood, Van Cleef, because some situations were good, some were bad, and some were just plain ugly, But the ugly ones never got much applause. To be honest, he even did the good ones, So it was only ever the bad.
Yeah,
it's hard, isn't it? How you get that into an order,
But as an industry, the health and safety in the CDM and the reporting of near misses and accidents is pretty robust, isn't it? I mean, through RIDDOR, it happens. It just happens. It's a cultural thing. There's very few exceptions. It's embedded now, isn't it? I mean, it's just part of what we do. I think that's the aspiration. Reading between the lines, that's probably the aspiration. But they're still, I mean, I'm aware that they're still asking industry, what do they think? What do they think should be the reporting mechanism, be it through CROSS or RIDDOR, or how are we going to do this? And it's going to be difficult, isn't it? Because you're going to be whistleblowing almost in certain circumstances. You might be saying some of your designers that you work with regularly might be reporting them, saying that this is wrong. This is they haven't thought about this, and this. And when do you do that? Do you give them a grace period? Do you sort of say, let's try and sort this out through design development, or do you sort of report it straight away? I don't know. It's going to be a tricky one.
Or do they go, we never spotted it because it was all CDP? What do you mean? The walls were all CDP. We didn't know any better, did we? Actually, anything apart from the frame is basically CDP. Great, brilliant.
Yeah.
See you smirking a bit there, Ian, but it's true, isn't it? It's crazy.
Good.
I'm just masking the tears, Paul. It's not smoking.
I know.
I think the point that Ian's made is a really interesting one, and that is that if it is the case that you think that somebody, I mean, clearly you don't know what somebody else's quote is, the detail of the quote, do you, Ian? But if you anticipate that somebody's missed something out, it's a problem, isn't it? Because you don't want to raise it before the bid is gone in, because then that could be your expertise that you're.
Well, weirdly, you if you do raise it before the bid goes in, you can end up disadvantaging yourself in the tender process, can't you?
Exactly.
You can.
And that's the issue. Actually doing the right thing doesn't necessarily deliver the right results there, because you're then basically providing a qualified price, because that's an issue that needs to be resolved. And as a consequence, you're not the fixed price person on the list, are you?
No.
Yes, very much so. I think that is a real issue.
There's a good article in our magazine actually this month about this. Richard Blackstone wrote it. I'll circulate it. But
got mandatory reporting. There's an article, is there?
No. It's more about issues identified.
Yeah.
And it doesn't say it doesn't make the link to, but it's to do with the I forget the language. I'll send the article around anyway.
It's going to be. When it does get going, there's going to be a lot of mischief and sort of sour grapes going on as well, isn't there?
Well, that's how do you separate these things?
I don't know.
And is it, as I say, is it reasonable to report? This is where subjectivity comes in, because is it a near miss because it was in that pack, or do you assume that there's a rigorous process that follows, therefore it will be picked up by somebody else and dealt with? So the assumption that it's going to be done wrong isn't necessarily right, but it's a miss, isn't it?
Could be potential.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think it's a subjective assessment, isn't it? And when you're into that territory, when you're dealing with busy people, they're not going to be doing the reporting, are they?
And you also, again, we deal a lot with things like the payment code, where you hear all sorts of shenanigans going on. But when you say, we'll report it to the Small Business Commissioner, there's a process, well, I can't do that, I never get any more work. If it's anonymous, yeah, you say that, but
there's a bit of that.
There's not many people involved, and it won't be hard for them to guess who it is, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think the other thing is that the expectation that the regulator is going to pick something up.
Yeah, is that a small problem, George?
With his expert knowledge.
No, I mean, I did some training with one of the approved inspectors the other day. I did it for. I'm not going to name the one I did it for, but I think when we went through, because I've always said, for me, like this is just my brain. It's always Reg 7, Reg 8, Reg 4 for refurbs. Appropriate. It's always appropriate for the circumstances. That's always the governing thing. And is it reasonable? Then it's all about, is it discrepant? Is it adequate? And does it comply with statutory matters? It's all it really is. But when you start looking at it on subjectology, these guys were just blown away, because I think they did not know. They all had like snippets of it, but when you put it into like a whole system approach, like the damp one I've shown you before, I've done duct work, pipe work, I'm trying to do cables and fire resistant ducts at the moment. You sort of go, no one's ever going to pick up on all of these nuances unless you've got good sort of robust contracting at the bottom that understands how you record the space risk and what it is and how you put that stuff to work. Of all the other products, designers at the top that know the same knowledge of how you classify things correctly at the start, and people in the middle that know how to manage the quality of it during a whole build process. Until you get to that point, that they're all kind of like it's only when it's like contractually when you become aware of it. And the thing is, you want to become aware of it at the earliest possible point, not suddenly you're 12 weeks from handover and someone goes, oh, by the way, all your riser systems and things are all wrong, because it's constructed. And it's like, what's the solution? Well, you got to tear it out. And I go, I don't want to tear it out. And you go, well, what you want to do and what you don't want to do is irrelevant, because to form those seals, it's got to come out. It's really hard conversations when you're at that point. But that's the world we're kind of in now. You can't kicking the old saying, kicking that can down the road is no longer a good idea.
So Martin, how are you? Because this must be a problem that you're encountering within BB all the time. Or, I mean, I'm not suggesting that you've got this problem all the time, but
just a second.
Yeah.
thanks for doing that, George. Thanks for reviewing that document for me. Very much appreciated.
Not at all. I think it's really good. Yeah. So, I'm keen to see the finished version and
yeah, I've got a meeting with MBS tomorrow to look at this structured system thing. And get some input. Stephen said he's put some stuff in an email, but he said he'd rather have a chat to me around it. So we're gonna catch up on that tomorrow. But it's funny, that's coming to bear on some of the sustainability work we're doing as well. Because we're trying to do work around reuse of products and then categorization of system, product, component. Again, is a challenge. So we're trying to we want to use artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence is going to struggle when you haven't got a clear systemized approach that works in the real world.
Yeah, one of the things that we've found using Uniclass, and I'm not saying we shouldn't use Uniclass at all. Quite the opposite. I think we should. But the relationship between, for example, the product classification and the system classification, there isn't one.
No.
Yeah. So
what Stephen claims there is. See, I can't find one, but Stephen claims it is a logical hierarchy. But I can't work out how
it's logical within the products section. But what I wanted to do was to have it so that when you pick a system under the system classification, you could then see what product types are likely to relate to that.
Yeah, so as it says, so it's logical. If you take product, there's a structured approach within the product directory, let's say.
Yes.
And there's a logic within the system.
Yes.
The system and the products don't relate to each other. So
correct.
Yeah, so it's almost like I think you need to take the product bit because we're trying to do so. Say because door sets is a product, whereas in our level they'd be a system.
Yeah.
So door sets is a product, but it's also door sets is a system, but we call it a product. I think that's the way around. I'm trying to get trying to remember which order it is. But like you say, so you can't then sort of logically build a directory of products and systems off the back of Uniclass easily.
And to some extent, don't say this to Stephen, but basically he's explained that that's why you need to buy Chorus.
Yeah, well, the Chorus is what takes the performance and then searches through. Yeah, so it's the mechanism for dealing with it, isn't it? Which, yeah.
But
I don't know what the alternative is. That's my struggle. There's got to be an alternative, but not. There's got to be a mechanism for us to sort of align them. But I can't get my head around it at the moment.
Yeah, the other challenge, and I believe they've now changed it, but in the old Uniclass, I was told, this was before MBS took it over, there was something called the materials table. So the materials table allowed you to hold in there things like steel or stainless, or copper or whatever. Whereas because there was no materials table, they didn't implement the materials table when they implemented Uniclass 2015. Therefore, every product, when it's classified, it has to say whether it's steel or whatever. So you end up with a lot more products, like a boiler, for example. You might have a cast iron boiler, you might have a stainless steel boiler, or whatever. And all of those are different product classifications, whereas actually they're all boilers.
That's the bit because we were getting down to because the structure that we've been trying to work with in terms of is super system, product, component, and actually there is a dimension below that the environmentalists have pointed out, which is material.
Yeah,
and there should be a material passport with the product for the sustainability reasons. And if you had that logical structure, the two could be the same. But because you don't, it's really hard to do it. It's really hard to manage the two together.
But what I was told recently, just the last few weeks, that they are introducing, or MBS are introducing or have introduced a materials table.
Okay.
I think part of the
That's gonna
issue
help me or complicate me for me, George. I'll let you
quite,
know.
yeah, I don't know either. I mean, it's. I think part of the issue as well is that MBS won the commission to build Uniclass, and they were paid to do it, over $1 million, I believe. But they've spent that money now, so therefore,
That's the end of that then.
yeah, they're now owned by a venture capital company, so it's no longer Reba. And obviously, I imagine that people will be asking why are we carrying on managing this? Now, I think it would be a real shot in their own foot if they stopped doing it, because I think Uniclass is probably a good marketing thing for them. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, that doubt they'd move. The thing is, they'd have to reinvent something else, wouldn't they? If they did something.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's might not be fit for purpose, or the purpose I need it for.
Yeah. Martin, would you like me to show you what we did at Digital Construction Week?
Go for it. You were asking me a question when I was rudely interrupted. George, what was that? Did you get the answer from somebody else, or did David chip in?
No, I can't remember, to be honest.
No worries, no worries. Let's have a look at Digital Construction Week set.
Okay. So basically, we had some online and offline discussions to answer certain questions. And these were the questions. How do we prevent incorrect design, selection, and installation of fire safety products? So that was the question that I posed. And this was the group that contributed to that. And this was the output from a combination of what was said in the round tables, but also we did an online session beforehand as well. So we've got some good examples there. Quite how I turn that into something that we can use, I'm not quite sure, but I think we've got some good information there. But 26 bullet points there. Then we had another one, which was how do we ensure that the asset information is managed through the asset lifetime. So I'll just explain why this particular topic came up, and that is that what I've discovered in working through, in particular on the fire safety side of things, is that when people are using inspection software like Bolster or Plan Radar, what they're actually doing, it appears that they're actually recording the golden thread, as it were, that they're recording is the actual inspection, rather than it being against an individual asset.
Yeah.
So therefore, in 2 years' time, when somebody carries out another inspection, even with the same software, they renumber everything, because it's the inspection that's being paid for, and it's the inspection that's being recorded, rather than the asset. So if you've got something like fire stopping, you want to see that it's lasted for 10 years or 15 years, and it's it has or it hasn't been damaged, and it has or it hasn't been repaired, you're buggered, really. So what we need to do is to make sure that all of these different records, because we're finding now that we're getting dozens of different golden threads. Everybody's got a golden thread. You know, fire doors, for example, you've got a golden thread that's being created by the manufacturers. Really good stuff, going back to, you know, where the product came from, even the individual components, and then the people that installed it, they've typically got their own applications to record that they've installed it. And then when people are doing inspections of fire doors, again, and it may or may not relate back to the same asset, if that makes sense. So those are the sorts of things.
No, it's George. And she said it, didn't she? With and Steve Jeffries was on stage. That everyone's got too many golden threads really at the moment. And you know, I've had this conversation again internally. Is everyone's at the moment? We've got a bit of barking going on at the moment about digital records, and I'm sort of going, as you said there, George, is that having an installed condition doesn't mean it was appropriate for the space or the risk it was supposed to be protecting against in the first instance. You know, it's just a record of what's been installed, not how you got there, if that makes sense. Oh, you've gone quiet, George.
I think you've muted your microphone, George. I think you might push the button on your microphone.
Was I over talking him?
Yes. No, you're right. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. So I wasn't over talking you, George, was I? So I thought you stopped.
No,
Sorry.
not at all. I was listening to you very much so. Yeah. But I didn't realise that I'd switched it off. Okay. So these are the results as to how we can overcome that problem, which it was great that people recognised that particular issue. So we've got here some steers from people, and then I'm not going into this in detail because we're going to put it into a report. Then the building safety data, it shouldn't just be a snapshot in time. So this was the group that were involved in that. Quite cross. We had several. You'll see there several landlords involved. In fact, most of them are landlords. And this was the results of the discussions.
Wow.
So quite a lot of good stuff there. And then this is the one that Paul led, where basically finish the design before you build it. Novel idea.
The school. I come from the school of the blue and obvious. Yeah.
Now, I think most of these we've not had, Paul, the feedback from the table itself, although Mandeep sent something through this morning. Do you know if anybody was making notes?
Yeah, I took my notes and sent them through, and so did
Oh, did you?
Scott, is it Fletcher Priest?
Right, from PRP.
PRP, yeah, he sent his through as well. So I did mine and he did his because I sent mine over to him as well. Because
so who did you send them to?
Let's have a quick look.
Are you going to say me?
Maybe. Possibly. I think I sent them through to Jizz, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think so did
if that's the case, I apologise.
I think you've got it there. I think it was quite concise. It's just, isn't it? Let's have a look. Just it was from Scott. Just let's have a look. Yeah, Scott Sanderson.
Scott sent it to me.
Did he not reply? I can't remember.
Anyway, yeah. So Martin, the key thing about that is that what we were trying to do was distill down what information is needed into some things that we, are topics that we then came up with. So I don't know, do you feel that's been useful?
No, I don't
brilliant
think
to me.
Yeah, it does. I don't think Scott sent anything through, did he? Just it's me going crazy.
I feel a bit better now because I've sent an email out to people this morning asking them if they can send
Yeah,
through their notes.
I sent something over to you, just didn't I?
No, I haven't seen anything.
What's going on here? Hold on.
I mean, Scott probably will have done. I mean, he got his notes there, and knowing Scott,
Gotcha.
I think he probably has done.
CW, hold on.
Anyway, so that I think I'll stop sharing now. So I think having some fairly simple questions there that people thought were useful. So
Yeah, the answer to the last one is the answer to most things. Quite frankly, that's something that we're doing as an organisation, and we're getting a lot of fight back from some very good customers, but we are saying you're not ready to a lot of customers at the moment. The days of us jumping in with both feet and starting to dig holes before we're confident that the services are going to fit, they're behind us. We're not doing that anymore. There's a lot of customers, including the biggest customer of all, who don't like that. When you play that one back at them, they don't like it.
Yeah, what I sent back, sorry, I sent you back an email, and what I said was, and I put Scott on it as well, thinking he was going to latch onto the back of it because he was taking some detailed notes as well. What I'd said was, look, information flow was obviously a key point. How you hand information to and forth. What do we know when it's not flowing? From the relative responsible, accountable persons. We underestimate the complexity in providing this information. We do underestimate it because there's so much more than just is it REI 120. There is too much belief that the value is in the market at the later stages of the project process, when the value is in the information, the products at the early stages. And one key point is, does anyone in the project process actually know who owns the design? And that is a big one. Does everyone actually know who owns it?
Well, you'd think, as a layperson, I would think that should be the principal designer.
It's laid down in the design responsibility matrix. Clearly, the plan of work tells us that.
Well, do you know what, Ian? It's a funny one, isn't it? It's a bit like saying, because I hear this all the time in defence of architectural practices. It's a bit like they're the designer of the wall, and you go, great. So, designer of the wall without any knowledge of how any product is designed and specified to go within it. It's all CDP. It's great. And it's the irony of it. Do you know what I mean? So when
isn't that where the designer? So you've got the principal designer, the designer then has to create the next tier. Design responsibility matrix should be a tiered thing. So if that's the case, you've got the principal designer sets down the overarching design responsibility matrix, and the people responsible therein have to create their own design response. It becomes a cascading document, doesn't it? Isn't that the way it should? Isn't that the way it's defined? It should work.
Well, I think that the theory and the practice are slightly different. Not taking anything away from what you said, because you're absolutely right. It's the issue kind of comes down for me is that if you've got a principal designer, and I think my biggest fear, and I've said it earlier, is that they don't understand, no disrespect to them, they don't understand all of these products and how they bolt together as a system. Because to be quite frank, it takes probably 10 to 12 years to become a builder control officer, and they don't necessarily understand it all either because it's just so complex. So I think that the crux is that if you've got someone that's responsible for the mechanical design of the ventilation system, my view is they've got to be responsible for every single component in it. They can't just go, well, the dampers are CDP. Actually, let's face it, the HU CDP, the BMS is CDP, and you sort of go, well, it's just fragmented, isn't it? But then who's bringing it all back into one system approach? Does that make sense? That's kind of where it all kind of falls down, isn't it? The amount of time
I could find lawyers that couldn't even tell you who's designing what.
No, I can
And that,
find you
you know,
just as
because
many.
of the way the contracts are managing it, it's very unclear if you look at what people are signing up to, what their contractual responsibility for design is.
It's like I said at the start, I've seen one recently with a ventilation system which is extracting smoke, and when you start looking at all the people that are involved in it, it's not appropriate possibly for what it was supposed to have been doing, and no one's actually spotted it because it's fragmented. It's really hard. It's really hard to get how you can control an industry to bring it all together. It's really hard because no one's actually doing it, and I don't think the PDs are going to be able to do that, are they? So
all the PDs can realistically do is specify the process by which it happens afterwards, surely, and because they can't be. I mean, George's question up front sort of covers that, isn't it? They're not responsible for the build; they're responsible for setting the framework for the build, and then at the end, what my assumption is, they're responsible for sort of the where you've got your CDM safety pack in CDM. They'll be responsible for overseeing the building safety pack, i.e. the O&M, to ensure the information is being effectively handed across. So I think so it's that the principle of their design has been maintained throughout. That's all the best we can ask them to do. They're not going to be able to get into all the detail, are they? So that's when the principal contractor steps up, and the principal contractor is responsible then for making sure that these things have been managed through the process.
and that's the interesting point, isn't it, Ian? Also again? Hello?
Did you want something, Juice? Oh, no.
Sorry.
That's my neighbour's dog's in there. No, I'm just joking. Gets everywhere, that dog. It's beautiful. It's the thing, isn't it? Is that when you look at it, and I think we're covering this a bit elsewhere as well, is that there isn't a process actually out there that tells people how to handle this information between parties. That's half the battle that's going wrong. Because the complexity of it's not actually discussed. Even for doors, Ian, the amount of times I see procurement programs where we're procuring the doors, and you go, well, is a security package let yet? No. All right, good luck with that one then. Next, and you sort of look at it and you sort of laugh, didn't you? And you sort of go, well, has everyone gone for the whole walking route of the building to see what doors are powered, what doors aren't powered, what security they've got on them? No. Because it's CDP by an MEP contractor. And you go, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, certainly. Abloy would be all over that, wouldn't they? In terms of how which doors, how are you doing your escape process?
But they're not in the contract, are they? Anyway, at the moment, and they've got a contract to supply somewhere at the end of it.
No, that's right. And Ian, I went out on a job the other day, and I can't name these jobs, but they're doing a cause and effect test. I'm walking past doors in certain common areas, and they're all powering open all over the place. And I'm like, you do know they shouldn't be doing anything but sitting in a static state. Really? You sort of go, so all the fire alarm interfaces are missed. You sort of go, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
So could you just explain that for me, Paul? Just to explain that static state.
If you've got doors that are powered and they're fire doors,
yes,
you don't want them powering open, do you, in a fire? Because the compartmentation's gone, isn't it? It sounds blooming obvious, but it's not. It's like lighting controls. The light should come back onto full light. Do you know what I mean? If you've got a door and you've got a security system and you've got a fire alarm interface, where is the interface? Is it like Machine Act where it's got to be a hardwired input to the device causing it to go open, or are you trying to do it over a security system which involves layers and layers of life safety critical cabling? Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of approach that doesn't always gets fully considered because it's so fragmented by CDP.
But that's where the design of that. See that again. I know this isn't how the world works, Paul, but realistically, look at the way it should work. Is the principal designer should lay out the process for that to be determined. So that's where the design responsibility matrix comes in, and then the design responsibility matrix at principal designer level should identify what's covered by that, and then what additional information, what additional processes need to follow in order to complete that matrix when additional information is pumped in. You know, that's the design responsibility matrix. Is just it's just a badly managed document from the outset, and
that is.
And yeah, we're still not really getting on top of that one, if you ask me. There's a lot of stuff at the bottom end, but there's not a lot of pressure at the top end to get that bit on it.
I'm just thinking from a software point of view, Ian, would it be useful? I'm just trying to figure out whether you could have a design responsibility matrix tied back to the BIM model. So in other words, you've actually got a way of allocating responsibilities at different stages to different people. Would that be useful?
Would, but that brings you back to the system product component issue. So who's responsible for what part of that within that? So this is why I keep coming back to the system-based approach thing. Because for me, if you think about the actual question is, who is the fabricator of that part of the building?
Yeah.
Because it's the fabricator that pulls all of that together, and then under what instruction are they operating? And so then is that fabricator taking any design responsibility or no design responsibility? And yeah, and you just got to work it back that way. But the who fabricates is for me always the missing link. I've got half-written paper on it, but I just keep getting lost in the. It's quite hard to articulate in places. But it's it's almost every example you think of. There's another one that and because nothing is bespoke, nothing is systemized. It becomes door sets is probably the easiest one to think about. But I get accused of just banging on about door sets, and if one gets bored,
That'll be with dampers.
Yeah. It's I think that design a structured approach to design responsibility matrices has got to be the answer.
Is that not tied up with information exchange then, guys?
Sort of, but BS 8644 is the key one, isn't it? For fire.
Yeah, yeah. If you can get that right at the beginning, who's going to exchange what information at what stage, that covers off your design responsibility matrix, doesn't it? You've kind of like nailed it at the beginning.
It's not sort of. I don't think BS 8644 is a standard you can just take off and apply.
No,
it's a
not.
process that you need to think about for each job, isn't it? It's kind of so you sort of need and we had that in our round table, didn't we, George? People saying it's just recommended. We'll stick it in the bloody specification, then it's a rule.
No, and that's why I talk about microbiology and water quality all the time, because the guide for that ends up being used as a standard, and it's not. It's a guide. You'll be so careful with it.
But again, if you read all the BIM stuff again, Martin, it sort of does dictate that this stuff's done. So again, if you read back, so it's all of the sort of the various roles in BIM and the processes in BIM and the myriad of different standards that come together to make up BIM. We'll talk about this stuff. Everyone gets lost in the technology rather than the basics of working out who's doing what, who's doing who's responsible. And again, it's sort of, for me, it's where the contractual stuff. This is where procurement and contracting, because Paul is right about the contracted design proportions. What happens is people sort of think about it for a bit, realise they haven't got time, whack it in a contract and move on. And some of the design clauses we see people signing up to are horrendous. Well, I remember the other week, there were 169 pages of amendments to a standard form contract. He's responsible for everything, like everything.
Yeah, I know. Ian, it's horrific, right? I'm not going to crush it, but it's horrific because they end up signing up back to back where they're responsible for the adequacy of the whole design, right? And then you're stuck because you've got interdependencies like security for the doors, you've got DDA for the doors. You know, I mean, I've seen jobs where people have procured, fire and smoke curtains. I need to realise that the curtain they're procuring doesn't have an S rating to it, because actually it doesn't exist because for that size. And it's like, how's it got to the point where you've ordered it? And that's part of the battle with it, because I think, with all these different guides that are out there, and I think no one wants to deal with the core issue is that the subjectology in its own right, and including doors, because they are complicated, we shouldn't take anything away from it because all the components got individual CE marks as well. Unless you go for the whole shebang of doing proper scheduling of where this stuff sits, what it's actually there to protect against, and classifying it accordingly, you're already on a hide into nothing because you're not identified all the interdependencies of that package. You know, you said earlier, if someone turns around and says, well, I can't procure the doors yet, why is that? Because you haven't got the security and the rest of it, but you're making me responsible for the adequacy of that door, then I ain't procuring it. You'd be off the job like tomorrow, wouldn't you? They'd be like, this guy's a non-conformist, get rid of him.
One of the things that I've been trying to do, you know, my sort of mission to get the product library established. Well, we've got quite, you know, reasonable interest from quite a few manufacturers who are willing to put data sheets and things like that on. But the other part of the equation is to try and record also what the specification is that particular product is satisfying, because that's an important part of the regulations. So I was telling Ian that I was talking with MBS Stephen Hamill at the Digital Construction Week, just to see how we could have, let's say, you know, we've just been talking about doors, or you know, we can talk about dampers if you want, Paul. But the specification, doors are probably much easier from MBS Chorus's perspective. But so I said to Steve, can we get even a reference to the specification? I think they often use the term keynotes that are put in BIM models and things to reference back to the spec. And he said the problem is, George, that an MBS specification can be 1,500 to 2,000 pages. So how do you identify what, you know, because it's a specification, I guess, for the building, and then, you know, it's a matter of them pulling out what is the specification of that door in that context. And I don't understand enough about specifications to actually make sense of that. I was telling Ian that Stephen was interested and willing to consider it, you know, but whether we could get maybe even an index on the specification, because to some extent, if you've got a specification that's 1,500 pages, as long as you can reference it properly and pull back that particular specification for that door in that instant at that location, then that could be acceptable. But I just wanted to share that. What, does anybody have a view? Because without having the specification, then because that's the whole, you know, part of the point about the golden thread, isn't it? Having a specification that you can then, you know, what was it that was actually, what was the intended requirement of that door in that particular context?
Okay.
The backwards way of thinking about that, isn't it? Because the other way around is, what do I need it to do, and how do I achieve that?
Back to your performance spec and detailed spec, isn't it?
And this is where you get the sort of the mix of the two becomes more difficult, doesn't it? What you sort of want is a performance specification. You initially need a performance specification, and then you need the technical design to go through and work out how you achieve that.
Yeah.
But again, because it's not a linear process, it's all just done in microcosm. Once you've got that original document laid out with its far too much information, you've ended up, everything ends up cascaded, diluted, and conflicting, and it's a mess.
Yeah. Yeah, if you start off with a performance spec, you have to iterate, don't you, to a solution.
So I just think,
then you lose the track. Yeah.
I just think, look, the way you've all seen the stuff I did on the dampers. I've done it for ducts, I've done it for pipes and a few others. But there's only one way. And actually, what I can show you quickly, actually, just to really bore you, and it isn't all just dampers, by the way, before you think it is. I want to share this quickly.
You're doing something on doors as well, have you?
I've not gone to doors yet. Doors are on my agenda. Funny enough,
You're on your to-do list.
On my to-do list. When you look at no, because I think trying to make complex simpler is the only way to do it. But I need to pick on Douglas for some of this as well. If you take pipe work, right? This is all the things for one pipe through one wall that you actually need to go to someone like Hilti or Rockwall with, excuse me, to get them to give you the seal type that you need. And you sort of go, that's just pipe work. And it's things such as the jointing method, where that jointing method is in relation to the wall, whether you need continuously sustained insulation for thermal vapors, or whether you can do something locally just for heat transfer, or whether you can do locally this way. You can't determine that unless you know actually what the fluid temperatures and the materials and things are. It's just impossible. Then you've got to consider is it in the whole with other stuff or not, because the aim is, I think, if you can, because the way I've tried to look at it, right, is that if a pipe's doing drainage, it's got a builder's regulation, for how you deal with the drainage in the first instance. That bit's got to be right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So is the drain, because if you end up with like big risers up buildings that are 30 floors, everyone will go, we want cast steel with, certain types of joints on it to go down the building. But then you go, oh, great, they put it in a riser with drywall on all four sides with a hollow floor. There's nothing there. And you go, well, what are you gonna anchor and bear it against? And you go, well, you can't. So you can't use that. So you've got to use a different system. You might go to a high pressure plastic like a HDPE. But then actually might be the wall's incorrect. You need a wall there that is solid brick, concrete or block on 2 or 3 sides to get your anchoring as you go down the building. Do you know what I mean? So all of these things have got to come into this thing here, so you know what type of pipe it was meant to be for its inherent purpose before you then get onto the fire thing of it. Then the manufacturer can tell you how they're going to deal with it. You've got to do it that way. So if you're going to do a specification for it, you've got to have this bit first of all to do the next bit. What we're doing is we're going, it's combustible, non-combustible, and we're relying on someone like a great fire stopping company like LDD or CLM or some of the others that are out there to go away and determine, what type of stuff you want for your pipe. It's just that just doesn't ring right for me. It's wrong. It's the same with the dampers, isn't it? You got to understand the space risk again. It's the same. You got to understand the space risk for this, because there may be occasions where you're doing lab work or something else where you can't use certain types of materials like stainless steel and things like that because of the fumigation risks. You might have to go for plastics. Do you know what? You've got to have a method to give people the way of going, what should it have been originally and what's been selected to meet that condition. Do you know what I mean? It's until you get to that point, and this is like you say, for you, George, this is what the list we sent before. This is what you'd end up having in the BIM asset model, but the templators don't exist for it yet. But that's what you'd have. And that's the floor of 8644. It doesn't do this. Does that make sense? And that's the only way I can work it out. And I'm still working on fire resistant ducts at the moment. I haven't got there yet. But all these subjects are complicated in their own right. So even doors, isn't it? What are you protecting against? You're protecting against a security risk as well. A functionality risk for people, the user. So some might need vision panels, some don't. Then you can start looking at what the fire risk is with it. We're trying to look at the fire risk at the moment, not the functionality of it. But the functionality comes back to haunt on the fire risk type of the door. Does that make sense? Looking at it in a code to, part B is the last bit you do. It's the first bit first, and you choose the appropriate, product to meet the part B risk at the end. Does that make sense? That's how I kind of got it in my brain. I can't.
Paul, have you done anything to look at because again, this is because everything is done bespoke every time. It's like every decision has been to be made every time almost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's part of the issue. If you took this to a manufacturing environment, you'd solve these problems once and you do it that way repeatedly.
Definitely.
That's the big challenge, isn't it? We're not the system systemized approach to building, it starts to assume that you'll start to make consistent decisions as a business. So main contractors would almost have their preferred method of build. But
I agree. I think the only issue for me is who's in the zoo, isn't it? So you've got people doing these who've got their own interests at heart. No disrespect to those people building the walls, people doing all these other things. They actually don't understand how what they're doing can affect the wall, or this can actually affect that via the wall. Because that door might be tested in gypsum, but they think they want to use. But actually, I've got flues involved. Need a blockwork wall, and suddenly the door's no good. It's those interrelationships that you've got to somehow get everyone to the point where, before you put that in a wall with all of these components in it, you know what all of these need to house them. You can choose the right wall and the right component to meet all of it. That's the jigsaw puzzle, isn't it?
But we've rebuilt that jigsaw puzzle almost every single time.
No, we do. I'm not sure you'll ever change that, to be quite honest with you. I don't think you'll ever change it, because I think, well, maybe with £10 billion and everyone testing every single variant that can ever be built on the world, then maybe you will. But that's not that's a bit in the long grass, I think, at the moment. It was just getting the same sort of thing for that to apply to the others. I mean, I'm still working on the others. The pipework one's horrific, because when you start looking at pipework, you're laying it bare. You've got different materials, makes it a different connection type, which means it's a different seal type. No one's really looking at it like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I suppose really, you might say that the solution to this is MMC, but that doesn't seem to be working, does it?
Doesn't help you out with refurb either, does it?
No, because you'd have to consider all of this stuff in the prefab before. If this was modules of rooms, then you've got joint methods where you connect the next room onto it. You end up with this UC connection if you're not careful. If they're not like a welded or a solid steel flange connection. If it's all like push fit, then you are in the possibly the UC world. If the seal wasn't tested UC and it's CC, then it's not appropriate. You might have to retest all of those seals to prove the materiality. It becomes very difficult. So you're just laying it. You've got to lay it to, as I've tried to do there. For if you went to Hilti or Rockwool and say, actually, that's what I need for that one condition. Then if you can build them all up by where it's located in a wall with all the different ones that you've got by that indicator where it is, and you can schedule it out and go, I've got all this stuff, all these different materials, all these different properties in that one wall, then you've got 90%, maybe a 100% chance almost of actually getting the right seal for all of those different materials. I can't see how else you're going to do it. And I mean, the guy from, if I still got it, the guy from Basek he gave me, where's it gone? Is it still here? I know I've shut it down. The one from Basek over cable types is CCA, BCA, all these different cable resistance ratings that you've got for classification and reaction to fire. And they've got acidity, all this other stuff to it. I'd never heard of it. I've been going through it all because I've got to try and schedule that out next in a similar diagram. So it's really not as simple as I think everyone's trying to make it. You've got to get the complex, then try and break it into a simplistic way for people to understand it. Then, as you said, I think yourself there, Ian, is that you then got to get them to, to pass that information around at the right time. It's a big cultural shock, I think, to get. You know what I mean?
Not one we're going to solve by Friday, is it, Paul?
No, it's not. Unfortunately, well, not this year anyway. Not this week. Not this year. Friday next year, same time.
Yeah, we were doing something last week on carbon. And one of the biggest challenge, most carbon information that's available is on concrete.
I know, it's brilliant, isn't
it? But most of the things that can actually make a difference are building services.
Yeah.
And getting carbon information, embodied carbon information, for example, on a pump is nigh on impossible.
Yeah, it's
because
it's hard.
Yeah, because you've got a very complex assembly of elements.
We looked at it about 2 years ago, George. You went through it with the guys who were doing TM65. I'm sure you've seen TM65, George. If you haven't, it's a good read. But that's about embodied carbon in mechanical electrical. And I mean, you know, whatever figures you do get, there's two assessed methods you can use, or an EPD, and initially they're like rock and horse poo, aren't they? So, you know, EPDs for plant and stuff.
Yeah.
You could be plus or minus, I don't know, 1,000%, 2,000% either way. You don't know where you are with it, because it's, you know, where's the cable been mined? Where's it been refined? Where's it been milled? How's it been extruded? How's it been wrapped? All the supply chain handling before it gets you. It's not impossible to put a figure against it.
Yeah, people are guessing at the moment.
Yeah.
Roll the dice, George. How much carbon's in that? 2 kilos, snake eyes.
You tell me. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're 10 minutes over, fellas.
Yeah. I need a shoot anyway. But
yeah, I do as well. So no answers, George. Just more questions, I'm afraid.
Yeah, sadly. Yeah. Okay.
But good to see you all again.
Thank you.
no, you two guys.
See you next month. Cheers.
See you soon, Jess. See you soon, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, 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 bye,
Oh,
bye.
Ian, when are you? Oh, that's okay.
Oh, he's gone, mate. He's out the room.
No, it's all right. No problem. I'll see you later.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Take care, buddy. See you, Jess.
Bye.